Good morning. Welcome to our first panel, Challenges Arising from Battle. Our three panelists include Army veteran Sean Lee, Army veteran Paul Wade, and licensed psychologist Grant O'Neill. The panel will range from 4 topics from moral injury to other than honorable discharges. At the end of each topic, we will open it up for a 5-minute question sessions, at which I invite anyone with questions to come down to the microphone and ask any questions that you may have. Our first speaker, Sean Lee, was enlisted in the U.S. Army in 2004 as an infantryman. In 2008, he served with the 10th Mountain Division in Baghdad, Iraq as a scout sniper. In 2010, he was deployed with the 101st Airborne Division in Afghanistan as a squad leader. His vehicle drove over a buried IED while he was taking point on patrol to meet with local village elders. 5 months later, Sean was screened for a traumatic brain injury. A CAT scan found over 20 lesions on his brain and damage to his left inner eardrum. As you can tell from this slide, Sean is a distinguished veteran, ranging from the Purple Heart to the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Sean's from Jefferson City, Missouri. In 2012, he received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Maryland, UC. In 2014, Sean graduated from the University of Missouri Law School with his Juris Doctorate degree. He was also instrumental in the formation of the law school's veteran clinic and served as one of the clinic's first students. He is associate attorney at Foland, Wickens, Roper, Huffer, and Crawford in Kansas City, and he's also a member of the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Foundation, where he serves on the Military Matters Operating Committee. Paul Wade was in college when 9/11 happened. As the U.S. invaded Iraq, he enlisted to become an infantryman so he could serve his country on the front lines of the war on terror. He served 12 years active duty as an enlisted man and an officer. He had 1 combat deployment to Iraq and two deployments to the eastern part of Afghanistan, where he worked closely with Afghan police and army. He currently serves as a member of the Missouri National Guard, where he has been a part of 3 state emergency deployments. As you can also tell from this slide, Paul is also a distinguished veteran, which includes medals and awards from the Purple Heart to the Army Achievement Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. Sean is from Springfield, Illinois. He's a graduate of Truman State University, and he currently is a 3rd-year student at the University of Missouri School of Law, where he serves as the Vice President of the Mizzou Law Veteran Society, member of Phi Delta Phi, and recently included in the 2017 Tillman Scholarship class. He serves his community as the Veterans Engagement Director, Team Red, White, and Blue Columbia, an organization that enriches the lives of veterans through physical and social activities. Grant O'Neill is a PTSD clinical team leader and MST coordinator at Harry S. Truman Memorial Veterans Hospital. His administrative responsibilities include coordination and development of PTSD and MST treatment services, outreach, and clinical supervision. His clinical responsibilities include evaluation, treatment and planning, intervention, and clinical consultation. He's previously a psychologist for the University of Missouri Behavioral Health and Family Counseling Center of Missouri. He's certified in cognitive processing and prolonged exposure therapies. He's also a member of the American Psychological Association and a member of the VISN 15 Psychology Professional Standards Board. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ssri Fowler, and I'm a 2nd-year student here at Mizzou Law. I'm also currently a Veterans Clinic student. Now on to our first topic. Mr. Sean Lee, take it away.
Okay, so I will be talking about moral injury. There's a variety of types of injuries that come out of combat. The obvious ones being physical injuries, bullet wounds, shrapnel, IED-related TBIs. And then you have psychological injuries. You have actual mental disorders, PTSD, depression, addiction. But moral injury is something that you can't necessarily fix in a doctor's office. That is something where you were exposed to something that has injured you morally and spiritually. And that's a common thing in war. Right now, society's working. We're all in a room, nobody's shooting at each other. Chances are if somebody commits a crime in here, that a police officer will come along, cite them, they'll get a ticket, they'll have to show up at court. If they don't show up at court, then somebody will fine them. Ultimately, they'll be held responsible. That's the point of society. We're supposed to have this capacity for a little bit of justice. War is the exact opposite of that. You know, we try and impose rules on ourselves and on the conditions, but frankly, the reason that we're there is because society has broken down and morals break down. So something that is common for soldiers to run into is they have either witnessed some real breakdowns of society, like murder, rape, lying, or they have participated in it. That's another issue that you run into. When you're in war, you're in danger, meaning the right thing is no longer convenient to do. Right now, it is convenient for all of us to do the right thing. That's the way society is set up. In war, it's not so much. Maybe letting somebody go is not so convenient. Maybe it's dangerous to let someone go. Maybe the safest thing for you personally is to not take that 5% chance that they might be an insurgent and just shoot them. Or maybe somebody next to you got scared and decided to shoot an innocent person, and you knew they were innocent. Or maybe, you know, you witnessed some commanders decide to cover up somebody who got scared and shot innocent people. It is a complete breakdown of society that goes on over there, and so people are justifiably morally broken. Now, the problem with that is you need society to bring you back in order to heal that wound, okay? You got to be able to talk about it. Most of us, we just take for granted that we talk about our day. We tell people what we had for breakfast. We tell people what we did over lunch. We talk about our work. We talk about our families. We talk about our dogs. We talk about each and everything. If we have a problem, then we call somebody up and we discuss it. You can't necessarily do that when you murdered someone. You can't necessarily do that when you were the witness to a murder. You can't necessarily do that if you helped cover up one. And even then, the cases where they are clear-cut, you know, you made a justifiable shot on a bad guy. Again, you can't bring that up. I can't be at the bar with a group of, you know, random Americans that I have befriended and say, let me tell you about this one thing. It's really been bothering me, but I saw this head come apart, you know, and then describe the details that come through in your memories. What it creates for the people who have these conditions is isolation. Society didn't want to hear this stuff. Your average person don't want to hear this stuff. If they're 18 to 25 years old, your average 18 to 25-year-old does not want to hear about this stuff. One, it's gross. Two, some of them have feelings of inadequacy because they feel like they weren't patriotic enough to partake in whatever you did over there. And three, it's not polite. It's not polite to go around every day and discuss these really horrible incidents. So people have these moral injuries that are essentially continue to be facilitated by the isolation that comes with having committed it and not being able to talk about it. Now here's another additional problem with that. That line that you cross in war to become a bad guy, it's not so far for some, okay? Like a lot of us here, we probably have pretty decent morals. We feel like we have pretty decent morals. Some people, just a matter of inconvenience, will turn them into cold-blooded murderers and rapists. I mean, it's not a matter of, you know, oh man, I was put into this terrible predicament and I had to make a tough choice. For some of them, once the rules don't apply and there's the slightest amount of inconvenience from, you know, a negative counseling statement in their administrative package or losing out on a promotion, they will cut lives loose like it doesn't even matter, because not everybody is that great of a person. We got millions of people that flow through the Middle East. A lot of them carry weapons. Not all of them carry the highest of moral standards. And when those moral standards are put into a situation where it is not convenient to do the right thing, many of them don't. And that's an additional part of the moral injury that comes with these conditions. You have this kind of built-in faith in society and humanity growing up in the safety of America. Even in the worst of the conditions, you know, you kind of always believe, all right, society is kind of fundamentally good. America's fundamentally good. And then you go out there and you find out, no, people will turn on you, good friends will turn on you, good people will turn on you, commanders will turn on you, foreign nationals will turn on you. You start to develop or learn this lesson about humanity, that when society starts to degrade, so does humanity. And so I'll tell you a story of one of these cases. There was a sniper who I was friends with, and we're two snipers really. They had tough decisions to make. One of them had a vehicle blow through a checkpoint. Not an uncommon thing. Most of these people can't read overseas, and their brakes probably don't work anyway because there's not a lot of mechanical assistance there. But vehicle came through the checkpoint. He was up on the building. He calculated his shot on the engine block. He took his shot. Vehicle stopped. He watched through the scope, and he'd actually hit the windshield. He had forgot to calculate in the moving of the vehicle whenever he took his shot on the engine block, and he shot an unarmed father in the heart in front of his entire family. Now, this is somebody who's low to mid-20s. He was kind of a recreational drug user before that, smoked a little weed, took a pill every once in a while on the weekend, maybe went to a concert and took a little, MDMA, but nothing major, nothing really addictive. After that, he was morally injured. He could not live with the things he did. On top of the fact that he had PTSD and these nightmares relived with him, he felt like he was a monster. And the same happened with other snipers. There were times where people did turn, and people did start to enjoy. They developed bloodlust. It's a real thing. And they started taking shots on people who weren't necessarily committing a violent crime or maybe were on the edge of it. And once all the fighting was done, they had nothing but time to think about their actions. They had crossed over that threshold. For the first time in their life, they'd been given all the authority in the world over life and death in the worst of circumstances, and they decided at that time that they enjoyed shooting folks, and they took a few shots on people that at the time everybody was high-fiving about, but later on they realized they deeply regretted. They felt like murderers. So these moral injuries, it's not just somebody was put in a bad situation. It's that war is a moral breakdown, and people are exposed to it. And then finally, there's the local nationals. These societies that we go to some of them are just absolute garbage. I mean, they have admirable qualities. The tribal aspect of it, the love for natural resources in some of it, unique languages, histories. But then there's the fact that the local culture is women are for working in the fields, boys are for rape. And so what they'll do is they'll have a bunch of women covered from head to toe in 130-degree heat, work in their fields as slaves, and then they'll take the little boys and go gang rape them. The entire police station will go rape these little boys, and that's their culture. Boys are for fun. It's nationwide in some of these places. It's so widely accepted, nobody questions it. And then there's also the fact that women are not really considered people. They're loved, they're cherished, but they have no real constitutional rights. Revenge murder is considered honorable in a lot of these places. If a woman is even accused of adultery from the husband that purchased her at some of these places, then they will take her out to the local dump and they will shoot her in the chest. And then they'll leave her there, just like a piece of trash. And there's no repercussions for that because it might have been a police officer or a local judge that did it. And then finally, there's the clergy. Some of these suicide bombers, they are doing this because they have mental illness, either PTSD from years of abuse or years of rapes or years of enslavement, and they're put into this home because maybe they rebelled a little bit. And the local clergy will come around and say, look, after years and years, a lifetime of torture, as a human being, that clergy will say, look, you can cleanse your sins by taking this bomb, wearing this bomb out into that marketplace, and detonating it. And guess what most of them love to do? They walk right into that marketplace and they detonate in crowds of innocent civilians because the local religious leader told them to do it. So that's the kind of moral injury people are coming back about, but they can't necessarily talk about. So I'll go ahead and pass it along here.
Paul, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, we talk about TBI a lot as being the signature injury of the wars that are going on now. I think moral injury is something we don't talk about enough, and I think it's a lot of that same kind of thing. I was talking to somebody about moral injury just before this began. There are some resources out there to help, and I think that moral injury happens probably less dramatically from my perspective. A lot of times it can happen on a large scale where people are killing. You don't think of yourself as a murderer. Then you go over there, you see somebody die. I think there's some other things that play into that too. In my experience, the average age of somebody who's deploying is between the ages of probably about 20 and 25 for their first deployment. They don't really have a mental model with which to kind of see how that all fits into the larger scheme of things. And sometimes that's, you think about when you were 18 to 25, year is a very long time in your life to spend anywhere, and you're trying to put that in, your mind is saying, is this the way it's going to be like going forward? And it's very problematic. I would also say that other things we do overseas just don't comport with standards. I spent most of my deployments, especially my 2 deployments to Afghanistan, working with the Afghan nationals, both the Army and the police. When I would travel outside the wire for my first deployment, a 15-month deployment, I would always have police and Army with us. We were always with them. We had to watch. They would come onto the compound. We had to spend a lot of time with them to make sure that they were not going to areas that they were not supposed to be going into, along with taking care of their life essentials. And then my second deployment, I was an advisor for the Afghan National Police, working in what is essentially their basic training unit. So I was embedded. I would literally go have lunch every day. I remember there was a point where we had to do a screening for TBI, different kinds of communicable diseases, and we had to fill out a form. They said, how do you spend an hour in a room with local nationals? And I said, yeah, that's lunch. Like, I'm gonna die of something communicable here pretty quick. But I think some of the things that you do see a lot is we had a lot of mission constraints put upon us because we were trying to get them to use their own systems. And a lot of times you'd see a guy who had a broken leg or something like that, and they would want an American doctor to help them out. And we had to tell them, you have to use your own systems to go do that stuff. And I was telling somebody about it the other day. I was kind of going back through how I was going to lay this all out. And I was telling somebody the other day, there's a guy in Ghazni, Afghanistan who walks like a dog. He walks on all fours because his legs were broken when he was a child and they were not reset correctly. And I can tell you, that is one of the most horrific things that you will ever see. I can tell you about it and your mind is going to picture it, but I can tell you that when you see someone who has to do this for real life every day of their lives and you see them multiple times, it is very troubling to you, especially when you see the way that this guy is treated because he walks like a dog. In a society, he doesn't have a lot of value. I'll say, speak to Sean's thing. There's a practice called botchabazi. You can watch, there's a PBS documentary on it, and it's called The Dancing Boys of Afghanistan. I have, I don't want to say mixed feelings about this situation, but I think sometimes that it's overplayed how open the practice is. But I will tell you the practice of little boys dancing is very common. When I trained Afghan National Police, we had a movie night every Friday night or every Thursday night going into Friday, the holy day. We show movies to the trainees to give them a reward for working hard the week before. And one of the translators brings out a video, and that's the video he brings out is a bunch of videos of little boys dancing. Then you watch the PBS documentary and you say, hey, that video I saw was the one that was in the documentary. That's troubling. You also see a lot of animal cruelty happens. It's just something that happens, I think, in a lot of third world countries, and you're just not used to it. And in America, we really kind of hide that from everything else. One of the things that happens, to Sean's point about war, is that you openly discuss options that I don't think are, that when you talk about things you would say they're evil. We've actually had where clans will fight against each other, and we've actually openly discussed the possibility of just letting one side win over the other, because you're trying to get this, again, you're trying to get them to use their systems to do this. And gender discrimination is a huge problem. The first time I ever saw an Afghan woman in real life, I was enlisted. I was standing outside my vehicle pulling security while we were trying to get a Humvee out of a ditch. And a guy drove by in a truck, and I waved at the kid in the back of the, that was in the back, or in a truck in a tractor. I waved at the kid in the back of the tractor, and he was in the, it was in the bed of a little wagon that was following the tractor. It looked like the wagon my dad has. The kid didn't wave back at me, and I look at the guy, and the guy's giving me this dirty face and this mean look. And that's when I looked past the kid, and he was sitting in his mother's lap, and they're wearing a blue burqa. So it looked like she was just part of the junk that was in the back of the truck. And I kind of saw that happen multiple times, especially when you start working with Afghans a lot. You will see women do occupy a position in society that is both cherished and sort of commoditized. You'll see multiple wives come out. They basically will, when we would train Afghan National Police women, I was asked by a general one time, are we getting these great recruits and everything? It's like, no, what's happening is we're getting the wives of people who are 65 and just are hanging on to life, and they can't work anymore, so they're sending their wives out to do something. So that was always one of the things. You would look at it and be like, this is terrible. Orphans are especially mistreated. That's where you get that's where you get your bachbazi from generally, is you'll see orphans. They generally go to the orphanage. You'll talk to a kid, ask him how old he is, and it'll tell you, Shvag, he's 6, and he'll be about the size of a 3-year-old you would see over here because he's so malnourished. And I'll just say that what we do in the Army and all the other branches, when we deploy people over there, we try to keep unit cohesion together. So what happens is when you go over, you will deploy, you'll replace an entire unit. You'll do this cycle of train up. You'll go over, you'll replace another unit, and then you'll come back as another unit. And I was talking to somebody today who didn't come back with his unit, and we didn't used to do this in Vietnam. And so you're going to see this too a lot in Vietnam, guys. With moral injury, I think one of the key things is you need to be able to talk about it. And I've seen things and done things that I'm not necessarily proud of, or that don't comport kind of to my moral standard. We were actually, I was talking about before, I saw a guy, we got called out. I was part of the quick response force for Ghazni province, which meant we got called out. 15 minutes we were rolling out the gate to go do whatever we had to do. And somehow higher up lost this mission that we had to go do, where we had to guide around somebody from the Afghan Department of the Interior and around our province while he was going to different places, to scout places, to have checkpoints and those kinds of things. And we had to miss lunch, and we're sitting in our vehicle saying, oh, we're going to miss dinner. And then I watched a guy step on a landmine while he was looking at one of these spots. And we were all kind of pretty happy because we got to go back and have dinner. And I still remember a couple days later, we're talking, we're like, remember how happy we were when that guy stepped on a landmine? That was messed up. And that's kind of what you want to be able to say is, hey, at that point we were literally weeks from redeploying on a 15-month deployment. So I think a lot of our compunction had just kind of gone out the window by that point. But we were able to process some of those things. And I think that's where the moral injury, when someone leaves and then they still are trying to talk about something, if they don't have somebody else that looks at them and says, hey, that's okay, these are the things that we do, this is what happens, then those are going to happen. I think Grant would probably agree with that. Some of that stuff, if you don't talk about those things, that then can turn into other cognitive issues going forward.
All right. If anybody has any questions on moral injury, we invite those now. I will say that after this topic, we're going to cover veteran suicide and PTSD, bad commanding issues, and other than honorable discharges, in which those topics will also have question and answer sessions. So if anybody has any questions right now on moral injury, please feel free to come to the microphone, or if you have limited access, just yell them out. Yes, sir.
Where can a soldier go to address moral issues?
Well, I would not recommend the bar. That's a common one, but I would not recommend it. I would say that they are going to have to work very hard on developing a social circle that they are comfortable in, that they can address that to an extent. There's not really a moral injury place at the VA. They'll take you through behavioral therapy and psychoanalysis and they'll give you drugs, nobody's going to help you, reintegrate society and have friends again. And that's really something that helps with moral injury, is that capacity. I will say that I'm a big fan of service dogs. There's one over here if you want to ask the owner a little bit about it, but I had a service dog in law school, and I felt like it really facilitated a lot of social interaction for me. Whenever I left the military, I thought, well, I could either reintegrate or I could go to a cabin out in Idaho and grow long hair and just forget about society. And it was really a toss-up. But I got to say, the service dog was really a big influencing factor of me making it through. And I think that all these like horses as service animals and fly fishing as service animals, like finding something that you can find a meditative task about, focus on one thing for a little bit, develop a friend circle through it. I think that's really where you're going to get your healing.
I'd like to add to that we actually see a number of people with moral injury that we treat through our standard. Am I? Okay. I'll be talking about PTSD later and the treatments that we do for that, and we can include, and we do include, some focus on moral injury and shame, and with that, we also oftentimes encourage individuals to seek a benevolent spiritual advisor of some sort, and so oftentimes that's our chaplain. Sometimes it's their minister at church or just somebody that they know, but finding that kind of spiritual support as well. There's a treatment that seems to have some promise that we're actually looking into right now, which is called adaptive disclosure, and it's specifically to address issues related to moral injury. So we're hopeful, we're optimistic about being able to apply that treatment as well. So.
Thank you.
I'd also like to get a plug in. That's actually Scott Bias right there who asked that question. He runs the Healing Circle here in town. They do a lot of work with moral injury. I'd also say there's a vet center. If you're here in Columbia, there's the vet center is in every major place there's a VA. They do a lot of stuff like that too, with sitting veterans down and do a lot of group work on that. Also, Team RWV, I'll give a plug for mine. We work with veterans to do a lot of physical and social activities that brings people together through that shared hardship, and they can kind of talk about, those friendships can kind of talk about stuff. I'd encourage community members especially get involved to kind of see what our veterans go through. If you ever talk to a guy like that, become friends, they'll open up to you. It's a really interesting experience.
I think we have time for one more question. How about the gentleman in the back?
Yeah, I just have an extension of the question that was already asked. I'm a relatively intelligent layperson who's not a veteran. You kind of dealt with it. I'd like a little more of a roadmap. And I talk to people. Veteran comes up to me, and I get a sense that they have some of these issues. You kind of touched on it, but I want to know what I need to do as a layperson to get them with the right people. You kind of touched on it, but I could use some more guidance in terms of referral. You might have to talk to these folks. There's these resources. I know there's so much out there. I even have a yoga instructor who's a trauma-aware yoga instructor who does a lot of yoga classes with veterans. So I know there's different things, so please help.
I can speak to that a little bit, and actually that's part of the presentation or the talk that I'm going to be doing in a few minutes, so I'm going to primarily kind of put that to that. And I think I'd really actually rather put it into that, because then I'll have it more organized for you and that kind of thing. But basically one of the key is that with individuals that have experienced trauma, particularly moral injury, that part of what happens is that we feel disempowered, we feel helpless in a lot of ways. And so one of the main considerations about helping someone is to do it at their pace, to encourage it at their pace, but not to cajole and things like that. And but if it's okay, I'm gonna talk more about that in my presentation. So.
Okay. All right, thank you for those questions. Our next topic will be veteran suicide rates and post-traumatic stress.
Okay, so there's some pretty startling statistics on the screen. I think that 20 suicides a day is reiterated pretty regularly in our society. The suicide rate is way up here for veterans, and it has only increased. Now, one way to look at that is that it has increased despite our increases in the budget to treat mental health. Another way of looking at it is it has increased in correlation with our increases in the budget for mental health. So there's a potential there of things that we are doing that are causing suicides. Now, these all show that there's risk factors and the age groups and who's killing themselves. That's all great. Mental health is one of the main primary risk factors. Depression, addiction, PTSD to an extent, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. All these things are risk factors for suicide. Now, something that is an additional suicide risk factor is SSRI medication. The FDA has recognized that for the majority of people who take SSRIs, antidepressants, it is beneficial to their symptoms. But for some of them, they take that and decide all of a sudden, for the first time in their lives, today I feel like killing myself. It's a known side effect of that medication. And it's one of our most popular medications prescribed. In fact, I think Abilify, it was #1 for a couple of years, and the side effect is suicide. So we have all these organizations set up to address suicide, but none of them are scanning for the potential that the medication that people are prescribed by their primary care physician is actually what's causing the suicidal tendencies. So all of us, as advocates and as attorneys, is this getting feedback from everybody? No? Okay. All of us as advocates and attorneys, we know, okay, I'm feeling suicidal. What do? Well, you refer them to a mental health treatment facility. You try and get them into some program. There's the Veteran Crisis Center. But also, we all have to ask the question, are you on a medication with a side effect of suicide? The FDA has warned about antidepressants because people have killed themselves in correspondence to their use. Now, not everybody gets a warning on this. There are lawsuits throughout the country in federal courts where the drug companies are held responsible for either deliberately or negligently prescribing this information without telling people a side effect is suicide. So it does no good for somebody to go into the doctor or to the therapist or to their program and say, hey, I'm feeling suicidal, and then start triaging and saying, all right, we need to get you a mental health professional, when it is the medication the mental health professional is prescribing that is causing them to be suicidal. And in some of these cases, the standard operating procedure for treating the suicidality is increasing the medication. Can you see where there's a problem here, right? So all of us as advocates from here on out, if we run into a case where suicide has occurred or somebody is suicidal, one question we're going to ask is, are you on a suicide-inducing medication? Or let me see the medical records of that suicide to evaluate whether or not they reported suicidality to their doctor after they started taking a suicide-inducing medication.
Grant, was there anything you wanted to add on suicide before we move on?
Yes, and I went blank for a second.
That's okay.
Interestingly, up until 2005, 2008, around in there, older males were more likely to experience suicide, but that was surpassed by younger males in their 20s and early 30s between 2005 and 2008. So that was one of the things that I wanted to mention. Of course, suicide prevention services. We do have suicide prevention services at the VA, and of course a number of efforts to try to decrease and eliminate suicide.
Thank you. And now we're going to touch base on post-traumatic stress disorder.
Can we go back to suicide real quick? Can I ask a question on suicide?
We'll have questions at the very end if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Do you want to go ahead with
Sure.
PTSD, Grant?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually speak for basically three different topics that I'm going to talk about. One is I'm going to talk a little bit about PTSD, what it is, and how we're oftentimes affected by it. Obviously, I'm going to do that very briefly. I'm going to discuss the treatments that are provided and various other services that are provided for post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd also like to talk about some of the barriers to treatment that veterans may experience, and make some recommendations about ways for friends, family to intervene with veterans who are experiencing difficulty with PTSD or other mental health diagnoses. So. Post-traumatic stress disorder, as I think probably everybody knows, is as the name implies, is a disorder that occurs after extreme trauma or extreme events that we consider trauma. So serious injury or death or sexual violence that occur either the person experiences directly, witnesses, or in some case learns about it happening to a close loved one, primarily. So there are four sets of symptoms that are common to PTSD, and the cardinal symptoms of those are what we call re-experiencing or intrusion symptoms. And those are the unwanted memories, thoughts, nightmares, that are experienced of the event that just won't seem to go away. It can also include reactivity emotionally or behaviorally or even physiologically to reminders of the trauma, that sort of thing, and it can include dissociation. The other symptoms kind of fall in line behind that because these intrusive symptoms are very aversive. It's common for individuals to try to avoid those symptoms by either internally by suppressing the feelings of anxiety, distress, anger, or what have you, or externally going places or engaging in activities, for example, that might bring up those symptoms. The next set of symptoms are what we call the hyperarousal or exaggerated arousal symptoms, and those are things that the primary ones are the ones that we're most familiar with, I guess, is the hypervigilance, extreme guardedness, difficulty with sleep, anger issues, and those sorts of things. So, and then finally, changes in mood and cognition or beliefs about our world, about ourselves, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next piece about the treatment. You might imagine that there are a lot of different ways that PTSD affects functioning, and I won't go into all of those because of our time. But difficulties with relationships, difficulties with emotional functioning, that sort of thing, and a number of diagnoses: depression, substance use disorders, other anxiety disorders, and etc. At the VA, we provide two treatments that are at the top tier in terms of evidence-based treatments for PTSD. And those treatments are cognitive processing and prolonged exposure therapy. What's important about the therapy is that a lot of people believe that post-traumatic stress disorder treatment is long-term, and which in some cases it can be, depending on how complex the symptoms are. These treatments oftentimes work within 12 to 15 sessions. 12 to 24 sessions is not uncommon. There are actually some people that benefit earlier from that. They're structured treatments so that we provide education, which is important about how the diagnosis develops. One of the things about PTSD is it's very confusing generally for an individual to understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And so we explain how how we understand the development of the diagnosis, and we also explain the rationale for the treatments that we have for that. There are other cognitive behavioral treatments other than cognitive processing and prolonged exposure. But they are primarily, that are evidence-based, they are primarily along the lines of cognitive behavioral treatments or within that domain. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the barriers to treatment. One of the barriers to treatment is that individuals believe, oftentimes believe that treatment doesn't work, or that mental health professionals don't know what they're talking about and don't know or won't be able to help because they haven't been in those situations and those kinds of things. Other barriers include things about the person's sense of self-efficacy and that sort of thing, like people are going to lose faith in me, I should just be able to gut it out and get through this, those sorts of things. And basically that those ideas about I can do this on my own, I can deal with this, it'll go away on its own, or that sort of thing. One of the things that we do know about post-traumatic stress disorder is that early symptoms of post-traumatic stress are a natural response to the kind of trauma that we've experienced, and that for many individuals those symptoms go away within 30 days, and in which case we don't diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder. After 30 days, if they meet the criteria for the symptom clusters that I just described, then we would diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Within the first year, oftentimes even without treatment, the first year of having post-traumatic stress disorder, many individuals recover from those symptoms. But we do know that if the symptoms have lasted longer than a year, it's virtually certain that they won't get better unless the individual engages in treatment during that time. Now, kind of as a back step, one of the things that about post-traumatic stress disorder is early on, the thinking was that anybody that experienced a trauma would experience post-traumatic stress disorder, or experience these symptoms that we associate with post-traumatic stress disorder. But what we actually found is that over time is that about 50% of men and 60% of women experience one or more events that meet the criteria for trauma during their lifetime. And yet the population statistics, of course, are lower than veterans, but they're somewhere in the 8 to 10% range in terms of people actually experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. That helped to start seeing what were some of the differences that made a difference in terms of recovery. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the motivation, or talk a little bit about motivation to change, and talk about ways of approaching individuals who may need help. And so some of the things that we think about is that it's understandable that individuals are oftentimes ambivalent or even conflicted about the possibility of seeking help. That tends to be particularly so if they hold some sort of myths or biases about mental health treatment, like those that we talked, that I mentioned before, like that people are weak, or those kinds of things. So that motivation varies over time. That even when an individual is really motivated, we see this often. We even see this frequently in the clinic, that the individual may be very motivated, and then the next week they might be backing off or be more ambivalent about it, and that's just a natural part of the process. So I've got 3 minutes left, I'm told. in terms of motivation, I already mentioned describing why the problem occurred and understanding a rationale for change. Another thing that's helpful is for the individual to know that other people have experienced the same thing. And so some of the suggestions that I'm going to make is that sometimes what happens when people try to get people to go into treatment, they cajole or they push or they kind of take their sense of power away and kind of, make it a mandate, that sort of thing. And so it's really important to show empathy, to show that you care, to normalize the symptoms, that these are a natural response to trauma, and that other people have experienced this, and it can be helpful to know those statistics, to let people know that, yes, about 20% of people who've been in combat experience PTSD. Those numbers are higher for Vietnam veterans. They go up to around 30%. Reinforcing their motivation, reframing help seeking. It can be helpful to say, I know that it's really difficult to seek help, and it's courageous to seek help. So I'll support you in ways that I can. Inform them that treatment can help, and one of the ways of doing that is on the internet. You can look up on the National Center for PTSD website. It's NCPTSD. There are some videos of veterans talking about their treatment and how it's been helpful. There's a couple of different forms of them. One's called Make the Connection, and another's called About Face. And there are probably hundreds of videos that include videos about veterans talking about benefiting from the PTSD treatment. And the last thing I think I'll say is that, sometimes people have tried treatment before, it hasn't been helpful. Sometimes they've tried treatment for other diagnoses or for other problems, hoping that it would sort of make things better for them with the PTSD. And so it can be helpful to tell people that even if that treatment didn't help before, this might be the time that it'll help, and that we have treatments, and every day we're learning more and more about those treatments. There are also a number of other things other than the treatments that I mentioned that are in terms of our service. And did you tell me my time's out? Okay, so maybe there'll be a chance to talk about that later. So.
And something we wanted to briefly touch base on was the VA Secretary David Shulkin's statement from March. This could be really beneficial if it is expanded, but he announced an intention to expand provisions for urgent mental health care needs to former service members with other than honorable discharges who are in mental health distress and may be at risk for suicide or other adverse behaviors. So this is something that could really benefit those service members who fall into that category, getting treatment for their needed mental health care conditions. Now we'll open up the questions for suicide and PTSD. I know, gentlemen in the back, you had a question on veteran suicide?
Yeah, can we go back to the suicide slide, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is mostly for Dr. O'Neill, if you could please indulge me. I got a portion of that study here, and that there were several studies and updates done on veteran suicide across the board, starting in 2012, and then it expanded in 2014, April 2016, August 2017 was the last update. From what I understand is the research team gathered about 50 million pieces of documentation from all 50 states to determine who was dying by suicide and whether they had a veteran status, right? To come up with the number that we have there today, which is 20 veterans die by suicide every day. Mr. Isaacs sent out an email the other day, if you recall. Of the 20, only 6 of them have recently received treatment at a VA healthcare facility. Okay, the other 14 did not. And I was wondering if it's possible, if it's because of those 14, they had a regulatory bar to veterans benefits, and therefore didn't have the veteran status. So in other words, are non-veterans being included in that number?
That's a good and interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that. What my suspicion is that for the most part, those 14 that aren't getting treatment are people that are eligible for treatment and aren't receiving it. But that's a good question about people that don't have veteran status and what those numbers are. So, thank you for that question.
That number also does not address all the veterans that are not enrolled in the VA.
Now we got feedback.
That didn't address everybody that is not enrolled in the VA. 57,000 veterans were discharged, and we're going to go over this. Were discharged wrongly, and they got the wrong discharge terms. From Iraq and Afghanistan. In Vietnam. So there's a whole lot of veterans out there who aren't getting any care because they were incorrectly discharged.
I think we have one more question. How about the one right there? Sorry, trying to get this.
When you're going back through the medical records and you're looking to see if they were on some sort of medication that has suicide as a side effect, do you look and see how recently they were started on those medications? Because a lot of the times they take 2-4+ weeks to actually start seeing the benefits. And I was just curious if you've noticed any like correlation between if they commit suicide in that first period when they start the medication, or if it's actually later after they've been on it for a while and the risk of suicide should have decreased by then.
Well, if it's a person who survived the attempt, then we just ask them, as how soon after you started taking the medicine did you feel suicidal? And they'll tell you just exactly how it all went down. But when I look at the suicide, or when I look at the medical records, typically you can get an extensive history from their time in their service through their VA time, and you can go back and you can look a long history of that. There won't be any suicidal ideations. And then you see that medication that is listed by the FDA, and they do have a list. You see that medication is introduced, and a short period after that, the suicidal ideations begin. Then you've got an idea, okay, I need to do some more research. And that's when you start calling family and friends, asking about their behavior changes.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to move on to our next topic, which is bad commanding and poor decision making. Sean, do you want to take that away?
Yeah, most of us have had jobs, we've gone to school. If you've ever had a bad teacher or a bad boss or a bad coworker, then you know what it's like to have a bad commander. The difference being, over there, they'll get you killed or severely, screwed over. I mean, if your entire, history of benefits, your education, your medical care, your awards, your promotions, all rest in this person's hands, and they're a terrible person, or they're negligent, or they're incompetent, or they just don't care, then...
So the way that it works is that if an individual comes in with the mental health, presumably with the mental health diagnoses or concerns, they're offered a 90-day episode of care, and the VA opens what's called a pending verification file to basically in which a determination can end up being made whether or not the condition that the person is presenting for is caused by or exacerbated by their service. They also provide humanitarian care in some cases, and so what happens during that 90-day period of care, it takes longer than that to determine whether or not the condition is service-connected. And if it is, it'll be treated as, in all ways, as if it were a service-connected condition, that sort of thing. But one of the difficulties is that we don't know that up front. And so we may provide the treatment, and the veteran or the individual signs with the VA saying that they're willing to pay the humanitarian care fee if it turns out that their condition isn't service-connected. And so, unfortunately, that's a fairly high rate. It's a $333 an hour rate. So, let's see. Oh, and that 90 days can be extended by 90 days as well with the VISN director. The VISN is is basically our regional network, if you will, and so the VISN director can increase that another 30 days. So I think that kind of covered what I had.
Sean, do you want to wrap up this topic?
Yeah, I would reiterate what he said. I yell a lot. I need to be told to talk down, not talk up. I'd like to reiterate what he said. You know, not everybody who gets an other than honorable discharge was somebody who was disabled and it was a symptom of their condition. Some of them are really bad people and deserve to get kicked out and not have any of their benefits because they did not fulfill their enlistment contract because they broke all the rules. But you have to be able to separate them from the people with disabilities. And the people who are the criminals, they're breaking all the rules, they want all the benefits, they're going to lie about being disabled. So you've got to get them evaluated by competent people to determine if they have a service-connected condition and if it was related. Now, the cost of this is probably, I think you could justify this being worth $1 million. You know, when you kick somebody out with an other than honorable discharge, you're taking, I think, $1 million from them. And the way I justify this is those benefits, you know, you sign up for those whenever you're 18 because there are real benefits. A college education that's paid for through the GI Bill is an important investment that you are making. You're going to go and you're going to serve your country, and then you're going to come back and you go to college for free. And that college for free is saving you approximately $75,000. The payments that the Montgomery GI Bill makes throughout the year for a 4-year bachelor's degree is about $75,000. Portion of that goes to tuition, portion of that goes into your pocket for food and expenses. So I think that's the first portion of your damages. But then the second portion of your damages is the money that you would make with that college education. You're going to college to enrich your capacity to do work. You're gaining a skill, and that skill probably makes you more money. Some people don't make as much money as they should with their education, like teachers, but you're going there because you're investing in it, and long term you're going to make more money. So we had a client that we calculated that for. He wanted to go to college for criminal justice, wanted to become a police officer, received another honorable discharge, so he could not get his benefits to do so. And at about a 2% pay increase for over 20 years, he would have made $1 million as a police officer. So what we're trying to show here is these folks that have these other than honorable discharges, they're denied the medical care that is essential to getting back into college in the first place and being able to do it. Then they're denied the college, the benefit of college, and then they're denied the career that they originally enlisted for when they envisioned college. And those damages, I think, come out to about $1 million for each person, each of the approximately 57,000 other than honorable discharges that there were.
Can I just say something too? I think that one thing I forgot to mention too is people agree to general and other than honorable discharges because I can't explain how, like, this is a group of pretty intelligent people in here, very well educated for the most part, except for me, I guess. But so what happens in a lot of these military units is there's a lot of rumors intelligence, so we call it rumint. And so among the discharges that you get, you'll hear a lot of, there's these rumors. They think that there's a 6 months upgrade. I've heard people getting discharged on a general or an other than honorable tell me that after 6 months, this discharge is going to upgrade itself. That's completely lie. And I kind of understand why people would say this to these soldiers because they want to, generate compliance. Like, I think that sometimes that happens with this. There's also I have heard people be told, all you have to do is get a lawyer, he'll upgrade your discharge, it's very easy. The Discharge Review Board, the last time I looked at it, had about a 10% approval rate for discharge upgrades. When I was a commander, I did put a lot of people out of the military. I was a basic training commander, so we had probably about 10% of my class got put out every cycle just for they quit or did whatever they had to do to get out. And one of the things that was my paralegal for my battalion was very clear, made sure that all the paperwork was done correctly because she had just gone under congressional investigation because someone had, I guess, gone through the board 2 and 3 times and was told that you could just get a lawyer and get this discharge upgrade. So I think, again, going back to my kind of thing about good faith, I think a lot of times the soldiers are just uninformed. They don't understand what they're really agreeing to and how to kind of see through this. So I think from both sides, you can kind of see why this happens and why this is so important that we kind of right this wrong.
I believe we have time for one question on this topic. I'm going to do it over here.
Don't move on. Someone's going on. I just want to clarify something Dr. O'Neill was saying. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking like that. I promise I'm not. I just wanted, in almost every case that the Secretary told me this, in almost every case, we're putting them in the hospital under humane care. And we try as much as possible, to waive all of their fees so that they don't have to pay anything when they move on after that 90 days. But the issue is the VTA decision to determine whether or not their disability that they're going in the hospital for in the first place, to see if they can get free care. It takes longer than 90 days. If you look at a process, it takes at least 180 days. A character services coordinator is basically what they're doing on a person who has almost very little record with another honorable discharge. It's almost impossible situation. So we try to waive the fees as much as possible. Also, I was wondering if Paul, unless I'm getting ahead of myself, if you touch on the Hagel memo and whether or not that applies to post 9/11 veterans.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, that's going to be the big thing.
I knew you had a question.
Just a comment. You mentioned the other non-position. Some of those are bad people. Like
Yes.
you said, who are getting that instead of going to court.
Yes.
But others are being pushed out on your reason.
Yes.
When you go to the lawyer, most of the lawyers don't look at the code. They just say that's like a non-position. They don't understand.
That's a big thing too. And I actually used that case where I was talking about the female who's going to get discharged. I said if she had gone to McDonald's and she had that code for patterns of misconduct or whatever he put her out on, she's going to be able to get a job at McDonald's working the front, working the register or working the fryer. But if she goes to apply to be a manager at McDonald's, they're going to look in that code. Yeah, they're going to look at that code and be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And I just point out, like, all across America, we're doing this thing where we're saying you can't ask about criminal misconduct and things like that. But everywhere you go, the first thing they ask is, are you a veteran? I always see it on everyone, are you a veteran? We want to see a copy of your DD-214 to see what your service is that kind of thing.
All right.
Is there any question?
One more question, Jay Myers.
My question, just comments, everybody think great. I heard about the automatic OTH discharge upgrade with my first client in the brig at Great Lakes. I was a lawyer. In 1978.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed if you figure out the year. The myth lives on.
That's the year I was born, so I got it.
I'll take the mic.
Okay.
Learned in church to always use a microphone. So I hope that we have inspired you to continue to help. I assume that you're in this room today because you have a passion for veterans. Our clinic declines 2 to 3 veterans a week. The need is overwhelming. We need help with discharge upgrades like these gentlemen just explained to you. It's real money to people when they can get their GI Bill. So please stay around this afternoon. We're going to have a whole hour-long discussion on discharge upgrades, and you will learn how to do it, and you'll feel good about it. Lawyers are trained to make a record. You got to help us help these veterans with discharge upgrades. Please sign up on our sign-up sheet outside so we can refer cases to you. Also, we decline veterans who have disability claims and are in their VA process. In order to help a veteran with a disability claim, you have to be accredited. with the Office of General Counsel. Not a big deal. You fill out a form, you wait a while, VA will let you do it. So please, if you are not accredited, pick up the forms out on the table to get accredited. Find a 3-hour webinar to take, and there's a free one and there's information on the table. Take your webinar and then sign up on our list, and we'll help you with cases that you take. We won't let you be out there alone. We'll guide you through it. So thank you so much for being here. Let's take a short break. Our next speaker is fantastic, and then we're going to do the Armed Services Medley, which is always fun. So grab some coffee and come back in 5 minutes. Thank you.